Yep,
I think we're good.
Sounds good. And then Doug can start. Oh, and he started recording. Let everyone join. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Office Add-ins community call. I want to make sure before we get started that everyone can see the screen and can hear audio. So if you just want to type in the IM window, that would be great. Sounds good. Hi, Martin. Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. We'll just wait another couple seconds, let a few more people join, and we'll get started. Okay, welcome to our Office Add-ins community call, like I just said. My name is Dana Weekon. I manage the community calls across our different products and services. Today we have the Office Add-ins team who will kick us off on our first quarterly call, and then we'll have our next one in June. The call will be recorded. And we will post an announcement in our Office Dev Twitter to let you know when that recording and blog post are available. As far as questions go, you can type questions in the IM window when you have them throughout the call. We'll pause at certain points for some of those questions, and then we'll also have time for some Q&A at the end. And any questions that we might not get to, we will definitely get the answers to those and include them in our blog post so everyone has that information. And with that, I will let the team get started.
Thanks, Dana. Welcome, everyone, to our Office Add-ins community call. My name is Kim Brandel. I'm a senior dev writer on the Office Developer Experience team. Really happy you could all join us today. As we get started, just a few notes about the community calls themselves. First of all, we'll be doing these calls with a quarterly cadence. So the next call after this one will take place on Wednesday, July 11th. And if you haven't already done so, you can use the link at the top of this slide, aka.ms/Office Add-ins community call, to download the quarterly recurring meeting invite for those calls. So in each of these calls, you can expect to hear what's new about the Office Add-ins platform and the Office JavaScript APIs. You'll also get a chance to meet the product teams that are actually building the Office Add-ins platforms and APIs, as well as take an in-depth look at certain subjects from a technical standpoint that we think will be of interest to you. And of course, have a chance for Q&A as well. Next slide, Sudhi.
Yep. So I moved forward. Looks like it hasn't refreshed. Let me give it another shot.
Okay, here it is. Yep.
It'll refresh. Probably a few seconds.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving here. The slide will refresh shortly. Here we go. So in terms of agenda for today, we'll meet today's presenters, and then we'll cover a handful of different subjects. First of all, we've gotten quite a few responses. Thanks to those of you who responded to the Microsoft forums to submit your questions and provide us some background on your level of experience with Office Add-ins. Based on those responses, we know we have a mix of folks today on the call some are brand new to the Office Add-ins platform. Others have been working with it for a while. So we're trying to put together a mix of topics that'll be of interest to everybody. First of all, we'll start with a high-level overview of Office Add-ins for those of you who are new to set some good context for you. And then we'll dive into some exciting news about the Excel API changes coming up very soon to be available in production in requirement set 1.7. We'll learn some performance optimization techniques if you're using the Excel JavaScript API. And we'll take a look at what's new coming soon and on the roadmap for Outlook add-ins. And finally, we'll just take a look at some developer resources to make sure that you're all aware of how you can learn about Office add-ins and engage with us, the product team. In terms of presenters today, like I said earlier, I'm Kim Brandel. I'm a senior dev writer on the Office Developer Experience team. With us today in the room here are Sudhi Ramamurthy. He's a senior program manager. Doug Mayhew and Tong Zhang. Doug's a senior dev writer and Tong is a software engineer. They'll be talking about performance optimization in Excel in the Excel JavaScript API. And Wei Love is here from the Outlook team to talk about some cool stuff coming up with Outlook. So with that said, let's jump in. I'll hand off to Sudhi for an overview of Office add-ins.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. So we are really glad to have this opportunity to provide an update on Excel APIs. So that'll be sort of my portion of the talk today. And for those who are fairly new to the platform, I just wanted to start out with giving a brief introduction about Office add-ins. So essentially, Office add-ins are a set of tools and technologies that allows you to extend Office application using web technologies. You're probably familiar with VBA, VSTO, so on technologies. Those work great and will continue to drive many of your business automation. What we are doing here with this framework is to give you web technologies, modern web technology tools to allow you to extend Office applications, and also give you more valuable tools such as an Office store through which you can centrally deploy. And also, if you're on an Office 365, give you ability to centrally deploy your solutions, more of a targeted deployment. So these are sort of some of the tools and technologies that will enhance the way that you automate your solutions and use modern tool and technologies. And in order to enable this, we provide a JavaScript library. So it's a set of library, set of APIs that targets Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote, and so on, and using which you can create your own web application, and then you basically provide configuration of your add-in in a manifest file. So together with that allows you to host your application within the Office canvas, so through which you can extend the productivity solutions. In terms of the building blocks, we allow you through the APIs and through the manifest definitions, allow you to extend the add-in commands. So you can add your ribbon commands and launch a task pane. And then through the task pane, you can also have interaction through the dialog API for more broader, richer experience and single sign-on and so on. The Office add-ins also allows you, if you're using Office 365, if your users are using Office 365, also allows you to do a single sign-on. So it gives you a way to get to the basic user profile and allows you to interact with, tightly integrate with Office Microsoft Graph. So like I mentioned, you can do all this using just standard web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the Office.js library itself, it's available on a CDN that you just reference in your script tag, and then off you go. So it's a fairly simple, smooth experience to get started with. So there are tons of resources online on our website to help you get started. There are starter templates and that will help you get started with. For today's talk, I'm going to mostly focus on Excel JavaScript APIs additions. And one thing I forgot to mention is that we also allow you to extend for Excel, give you custom functions, ability to define your custom functions through the JavaScript APIs. So with that, let's talk about the Excel APIs. Our journey to providing more modern API interfaces started with Office 2016. So we had what are known as requirement sets. You can think of them as versioning that ties back a set of features back to an Office version. And with 1.1, we started out rolling the Excel APIs using the modern interface. That means it has its own namespace, and then we exposed some of the basic components of Excel, such as worksheet, workbook, range, table, and so on. And over the quarters, we have incrementally added new features and functionalities. So as you can see, over the last 2 years, we've done sort of several releases and included more advanced features, things like filtering, sorting, ability to add events, custom XML paths, tons and tons of new functions related to range manipulation, and then conditional formatting, and then lots of calculation and worksheet functions. So we are excited to announce that we are very close to releasing Excel 1.7, and so this by far I think is the biggest in terms of the number of APIs that we're adding since the very first release. So I'll get to the individual features that are sort of highlights of this API set, and also want to point out these features are available across all the cross-platform. Includes Windows, MacBook, online, and iPad. So these API sets currently are available in the beta API set, so beta CDN, but we're just a few days away from releasing it in the GA, general available channel. So I'm going to go into the individual feature set that make up the 1.7 release. And we really kind of focus more around, hey, how do we help our developers customize the appearance? You might be creating a set of reports or charts and to help visualize the data. So how can we make it more customizable and then give you more finer level controls? Not just with charts, but also with other range-related functionality. And also help move data around within the application, such as making a copy of the worksheet from one to another worksheet. And also give you more finer level controls around sharing and protections, including more sharing features. So together with this, we think we get a deeper integration capabilities and help user get more deeper understanding of the data. So there's quite a lot, so I'll run through some of them. We have documentation that goes into a lot more detail at individual API set levels. So beginning with chart, we added capability to add and set series, access unit and title, and then also the data label set. So this will allow you to not just add them, but also manage the appearance of these chart attributes. We now allow you to access the styles, both built-in, and you can also create a custom style and apply it on a range. Earlier, we had the capability to protect the worksheet and workbook, but we couldn't really give you the password-based protection. With this release now, we allow you to supply a password, and based on that, you can protect the not just the worksheet, but also the structure of the workbook. And on the theme of controlling the UI better, we now allow you to freeze rows and columns and also get the attributes of the frozen pane. And then for managing workflows, this is super useful, which is to allow access to built-in properties and also create your own custom properties. And to help movement of data between the worksheets, copy worksheet API is now available. So this will allow you to not just copy the data, but you can also copy the formatting from one worksheet to another. This is especially useful if you have a template, and based on your workflow, you want to replicate that template across different worksheets and allow users to continue on. And also to help with the navigation and the appearance, we allow you to do setting the tab color and turning the grid line on or off depending on your requirement. So those are just some of the higher level features. So there are a lot more finer level API, things like you can now get the active cell, you can update the named item to a different reference. You can also access a ton of new range functionality. So all of that is available in our online documentation, and they'll all be marked with the requirement set of 1.7. So if you open a document, which I'll later show, and if you see 1.7, you know that it is part of the new requirement set. And we also did a ton of work on the eventing. and we had existing events, but those were fairly limited in nature. Now we are modernizing the event API, and this here shows some of the high-level features. And now on a worksheet or on a worksheet collection, you can get notification on activation and deactivation. Anytime a worksheet is added, you can get notified. Anytime a worksheet or table gets changed, the data is changed, you can get notified of that, and also the selection changed events. So we're working on a lot more set of APIs and for the eventing, so we'll reserve that for a future call. Now, I talked about quite a lot of these features. Now, how can you actually access them? Now, I'm going to end this presentation view for a second and then switch over into Excel. Now, you're probably all familiar with an add-in called ScriptLab. Now, ScriptLab allows you to interact with Excel in a developer environment. That means you can write the Office.js script and interact with the document, in this case, Excel. And then within the ScriptLab, we have a tab and an option for looking at samples. And we incrementally add new samples as and when we introduce new APIs. And there's a section called Preview APIs. As I mentioned, 1.7 is still in preview, but we're going to be adding these back to its respective headers, such as range and table and so on. But the preview APIs for now is a great place to get started with. So you can access any of these scripting examples and start out and start playing around with it. And I'm going to show a couple of them today. And since the view of the coding window is fairly limited here, I'm going to switch over to a larger screen on the Visual Studio Code and then showcase some of the new APIs. And I just want to also point out all of these APIs we had, we had the developer experience in mind. That was a sort of number one development criteria, which is to make this simple. And if you're already familiar with Office.js and using Excel, these should be a fairly simple addition to add on to. Now I'll begin with chart, just to kind of showcase the flavor for these APIs. Now with the chart, we had the ability to access the chart and create charts, but now we can actually add the series. And I have an example here on a sheet called walkthrough. I'm getting the empty chart located here. And I have a couple of range, and based on those range, I want to set the X and Y axis. So I begin by creating a series. So I have chart series add gets me a series. I can set the X and Y axis to the new range reference that I have. And I can continue on the same series. I can mark the style of the points to circle and set the background color to red for the markers, and make all the data labels show up as part of the chart. And finally, add a trend line. And I format the trend line to show the display of the equation. And I mark the color to green, and then I set the format line to dash dot. Now you can see this is a fairly simple script, but gives you a lot more flexibility to now interact with your charting in a whole different level. I'm going to switch to the sample. I'm going to remove the existing. So I'm going to run the script, and basically it'll follow along what I just showed you, which is added a series, it marked the pointers, it enabled the data labels, it added a trend line, formatted the trend line, and showed the equation and colored the trend line as well. So you can see it's a fairly simple access pattern. You can get started quite easily. Now, I did this using the samples that I showed as a starting point, and then I customized more using the IntelliSense to discover more capabilities. I'll show one more additional API set. So this one belongs to events. Now, we had the events, but it was very much tied to a concept of binding. Now, with the new APIs, you don't need the binding to register for your events and get notification. You can take the underlying object, in this case, a table. So now what I'm trying to do is to register for data and selection changed event on a table. So I get the sales table, and on it, I say, okay, I'm interested in the on changed data event, and I add a function as a callback. And all that callback is doing is just showcasing the address on which the data changed event occurred. And I also say, okay, if the selection changes, and I'll call another function which just shows the address of the selection. So that's as simple as it gets. So all you need to do is, on a given object that we support, look for on and then a set of events, and then subscribe and unsubscribe to the event itself. Now I'll just showcase how it looks from an experience standpoint. So here I'm going to run this. I think this will create a sample table. Now I'm going to register for on changed, and it says, okay, I've registered for it. Now I'm going to make a change. In this case, I think it's going to update one of the cells. And as you can see, the B7 got updated, and it says, okay, here's the data that was actually changed in the location. Now we've enhanced the arguments quite a lot. As you can see, the table changed event now not only has the address, but also the type of change and the source, whether it's local or remote. So the event arguments themselves have become a lot more richer in capabilities. I will show a couple more samples. I'll leave it up to you to go explore this in the script lab for more interactive experience. And a couple of my favorite ones that I want to showcase are the protection ones. So like I mentioned earlier you could protect, but not really with the password. And with the new APIs, what it's doing is it's getting the active worksheet, and it's checking, hey, is there protection already? If not, protect this with a password. And the password could be just any string that you get inputted into this function. Now what it allows you to do is to share this workbook knowing that your data is protected with a password that only your users are aware of. Now you can also unprotect using very similar pattern. Now using this, it'll prevent changes to the worksheet, and you can pass an argument which I've kept it to null, but you can have a multiple level of configuration on deciding which ones to share and which one not. And then at the workbook level, you can also protect with the same password. This allows you to prevent users from adding new worksheet. So this is more of a structural protection. And lastly, I want to mention the copy worksheet that I talked about earlier. So it's a fairly simple API. You can say copy and give it a parameter on where the worksheet should end up. In this case, I'm saying show it at the end. So this creates a new worksheet and copies all the data. This is just a sample of the kinds of API and how interactive it is, and then how easy it is for you to go explore. I highly encourage all of you to go look at the, start from Script Lab, go look at the samples. There are plenty of them, and you can explore and tell us what you think. You can send feedback through our feedback channels, and if you have any questions for now, feel free to stop typing away in the chat window, and as we go on to the next section of the presentation, we'll try to address them as well. So I think that's sort of the high-level overview of the Excel 1.7 APIs. I think we can move on to the next section of the presentation, which is on the performance optimization. I'll share the presentation again.
Great, thanks, Sudhi. This is Doug Mayhew. As Kim mentioned earlier, I'm a dev writer on the team, and also have here Tong Jiang, who is one of the engineers behind some of the performance improvements that we're going to talk about here. So I think a way to kind of frame performance, we have all these APIs, as Sudhi was just describing, and then when people go out and try to use them in their applications kind of in the wild, you may run into better or worse performance than you expected. And part of our job here is to make sure that we optimize performance both on the back end, what's happening when you call that API, and also best practices that you can follow in your own code. So we think of it in terms of these two general categories of performance improvements. Data-driven performance improvements, that's based on telemetry data that tells us, this particular API call tends to take a long time, those sorts of things. And we analyze those in the back end, and then the engineering team looks at how to improve, better algorithms, better implementation, and so on. And there's no changes required to your code. You just find that there's better performance after we make those adjustments. Then also customer-driven performance improvements. We get questions on Stack Overflow, people report issues on GitHub, and sometimes the core issue is a misunderstanding about how to use the API, or perhaps we haven't documented best practices for that particular API. And so for those, I guess I would encourage all of you, as you start using more and more of these APIs, if you ever run into something that just feels slow to you, slower than you would expect, based on your knowledge of Excel, we'd like to hear about that, because there may be something we can recommend in terms of your implementation, and also there may be something we can do on the back end. So I want to show you a couple examples here of performance changes we've made recently and how those have come about related to these two buckets. So the first one, data-driven. Let's see, I think we have a slide here coming up. Yep, there it is. So for data-driven improvements, there is one scenario that Tong has put a bunch of work into lately, and I just wanted to draw attention to data import. What we found is that when you add some data to a range or a table, as you add more and more data, that was slowing down rather significantly. And we had customers reporting this, and we observed it as well in our telemetry. And so, long story short, there's been recent improvements to this that you should probably have in the current build. Actually, Sudhi, is it fair to assume that this is rolled out to all the platforms now, this particular improvement?
It is either rolled out, or it should be very close.
Yeah.
Depending on where the customers are in their upgrade cycle.
Great. So, it kind of varies depending on which platform you're on and which version, but a key concept here is that in this particular improvement, range-right API performance, you don't need to change anything in your code. And if let's say you tried importing thousands of rows to a table a while back and it seemed kind of slow to you, you should try again because this has gotten significantly faster. And that's just a back-end performance improvement that doesn't require any change in your part. A couple other things to note. Worksheet add performance is another area that we've significantly improved recently. And right now we're looking at adding table rows as opposed to data import as another area of focus. So as an example of how that all came about, this particular GitHub issue here is just an example of what you can do. Come to us and report a GitHub issue. In this case, this person, Lance, reported, let's see, back in September, I'm creating a table in Excel using new promise-based APIs, inserting data, performance isn't what I would have expected. And that launched, there's a very long comment thread on that particular issue where multiple Excel engineers, one of the engineers behind Script Lab, various PMs from Sudhi's team, many people here at Microsoft waiting on that, went back and forth, discussed repros, and the end result of all that was the performance improvement that I mentioned that Tong championed here. That makes that code significantly faster. So that's an example of kind of feedback in action. And then on the next slide here, I want to talk to you a little bit about some specific things that we've started doing. We started in the advanced concepts section of the Excel JavaScript API documentation, and there's a link at the bottom of that slide that you'll get. There is a topic there that's just called performance optimization, and we're adding more and more sections to it over time. So we've started with the 6 scenarios listed on this slide, and then as we go forward, if you report other things that people have questions about, we will add examples there. And for each of those sections listed, I'll just briefly tell you what kinds of things we're doing there. For each one, we show you an example of here's how not to do it, here's the right way to do it, and kind of a general description of the issue. So for example, minimizing the number of sync calls, that's kind of a core best practice for all of the Office.js APIs. You saw in the code that Sudi showed you, if you're new to that, right at the end of each of those blocks of code, he was showing there's a context.sync. And that's where the changes you have just specified in your code actually happen in the UI, and it updates with the latest data and so on. So a core concept there is to minimize the number of those, basically by queuing up as many changes as possible before you actually do the sync. A common rookie mistake is to have too many context syncs in your code. Proxy objects, that's about, let's say you create a range, worksheet.getRange, and then you want to format it or set a number format or change the value. Don't keep creating yet another worksheet.getRange every time you do that. You just can create it once and assign it to a variable, or even better, you can also say worksheet.getRange of the range you want, and then the set method will let you set a bunch of different things all at once in one line of code, basically. So those are some of the best practices documented for that one. Loading necessary properties only. A key concept here is you need to explicitly load the properties of a proxy object, and by default you get everything. So if you just say a load without specifying what properties you want, there's a performance hit there because many of those properties you may not care about, but those are all getting set. So being explicit in that case really helps improve your performance. We've added a new API on the next item here called Suspend API Calculation Until Next Sync. That's kind of a mouthful, but it does exactly what that says. The idea is stop calculations for now. I'm going to do a bunch of things. I'll let you know in my code when I'm done, and then recalculate everything. And there can be big performance improvements from using that appropriately. Updating all cells in a range. If you're writing the same value to a huge range of cells, you don't want to iterate over all those cells and set it for each one individually. Excel has a very optimized approach where you can specify that once and say, write this value to all those cells. You can also say it for like a column. Let's say you want to format each column differently in a table or something. So you can look at it as each of those columns has one property value you're going to set for every cell in that column. You can do that as one API call rather than iterating through all the cells. And then the final item on this list here is importing data into tables. So that's the example from that other data-driven example from the GitHub issue. And there we show you basically best practice for doing it, but then also you're going to benefit from the performance improvements in the back end that Tong and his team have made. So those are some examples of recent performance improvements, and I guess the one takeaway I'd like you to take from this part of today's call here is we're very interested in your feedback. If you run into things that you feel performance isn't what you'd like to see, please either go to Stack Overflow if you have a question, or if it feels like an issue to you, you think it's a problem in our code, feel free to create a GitHub issue on the Office.js repo in the Office Dev org on GitHub, and we'll take a look at that and work with you to figure out what's going on and what the best practice is to improve your performance. So I think that's what I have for performance, and we can move on. I believe Wei is going to talk to us about...
There is one question regarding this that Arvind had asked, and it says, does this include applying formatting to the cells?
Oh, let's see. Applying for it. You mean the concept of applying a single value across?
So for this one, to applying format to the cell, you need to, I think you need to set it like cell by cell. But if you want to change the number format, it's a different thing other than the applying format to the cell. So if you want to apply number format, definitely you could do the apply a single number format to all the range by just applying a single value to the whole range.
Yeah, I think one of the nature of the API for setting range format is that it sets the format for the entire range you supplied. So you have a set of cells and you want to control at a cell level which format you want. Today the only option is to iterate over. So that may be what what Arvind is alluding to, is that if I have a large set of range and I want to control at a cell level and apply a specific format, And in today's world, yes, there is a need to iterate over Excel. So that is something that we've heard, and we are thinking about ways through which we can enhance that feature to allow that in a single API call. But for now, you would have to set that at a cell level.
Okay, so Arvind just is summing up. So copy paste of formatting from one range to another or cell by cell. I'm not, does that make sense?
So yeah, so today
Okay.
if you are moving formatting from one region to another, you can definitely use the copy worksheet and then remove the parts that you don't need, including the data that you don't need. So that's one way of transporting. The second is to get the cell properties at a individual cell level and copy over. And we do have copy paste as one of the roadmap item. That is not as part of this release, but we should get more details on the next call. And that should make copy pasting of values and formatting a lot more simpler.
Okay, great. And one more comment before we move on, and then we'll go on. Charles says what we need is the ability to apply the format of a range to another range.
Correct. Yeah. So we believe copy paste is one way of going about it, probably the more efficient way. And that way you can select any range and let Excel manage the application of the formatting rather than us dealing at a very micro level. So once the copy paste API feature is available, it should make it a lot more simpler. And we're also thinking about other kind of additional structure that we can introduce that will allow you to read the cell level properties in a single API call. But we don't have anything specifically to talk about that. It's still very early stages.
Okay, great. We'll save a couple of the other questions for the end, and we'll let Wei take over on the Outlook add-ins.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
All right. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great.
Yep.
So
yeah,
for those of you who may not know me, I'm Wei, and I'm a PM on the Outlook add-ins team. So we actually, for Outlook, do a separate community call as well. So we do a little bit more deep dive into what's going on there. So in this one, I just wanted to talk to you all a little bit about what we've been working on, what we see coming in the near future, and then what's further out on the roadmap. And
okay. The slide has updated on my view, but it's taking a while. So let's see.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare, and hopefully that'll fix the issue.
Okay. Well, while you're doing that, I have it pulled up so I can kind of start talking about what's new. So we've been working a lot on growing the API requirement sets that we have available. So the first thing is that our API requirement set 1.5 is supported now across all of our desktop clients. And API requirement set 1.5, let me just click this link. And 1.6 are our way of continuing to expand functionality. So in requirement set 1.6, we have some APIs that will support your detected entity extension points. And detected entity extension point is if you have a contextual activation. So if you're activating based on a regular expression in an email. We also did some work around some display APIs. It's coming.
Are you
Having Wi-Fi.
Wei, we're trying to change machines here so that the slides will sync.
Oh, okay. No worries. So we did some work around display APIs. in requirement set 1.5. So being able to display a reply form or display a reply all form. We also introduced pinnable functionality with requirement set 1.5, which allows you to basically have a user decide that they want to keep an add-in open as they're navigating through messages in their inbox. Other work that we did, every time I see the screen flash, I think it's going to be updated, is around centralized deployment for Outlook add-ins. So this was made available at the end of February 26th. This is the ability of an administrator to control who an add-in is installed to, whether that's a single user, a group of users, or the entire organization. We made some updates to the user experience inside the store. So we changed to what we now have are tiles instead of the line item list. And then very recently, actually, I think last week, we added support in production that should be rolling out over the next couple of weeks to the pinnable task pane in OWA for business. The pinnable task pane was already available in desktop Outlook 2016, but it's now available for business users in Outlook on the web. And then that's what's new. And if we go to what's coming soon, we're continuing to work on feature parity, and a lot of the work that you're seeing here is coming in through Mac Outlook. So bringing in the pinnable task pane for Mac Outlook, detected entities for Mac Outlook, single sign-on work will also be coming, and then being able to enable add-ins for Gmail accounts. And it looks like there's a question. It should work now, Alon. So the question was, when can we expect centralized deployment to work for an Outlook add-in? Should work now. It GA'd on February 26th. And then Edwin. Yeah. Actually, so on the roadmap slide, Eric, things that we're working on right now are requirement set 1.7, so adding APIs for the from address, recurrence, recipient events. Those are things that we got through user voice. Bringing single sign-on support for MSA accounts, access for add-ins, and delegate access and shared mailbox. In Outlook 2016 will be the first client where that comes. And then we're going to continue to explore new extension points. So, yeah. So we've gotten to one of your specific questions, Eric, which is the shared mailbox. So that's something that we're currently investigating. And maybe in our next community call, we'll have a little bit more progress to share on that note. We are continuing to look at the user voice. We have been doing a big engineering effort on our side, so we haven't been able to pick up as many new features, but we're looking forward to getting through those. I know they're not updated on user voice. I've been actually trying to figure out how we can do that because I'm struggling with my permissions there. But hopefully within the next month or so, we'll start to be able to see some of the changes in the status. And Alon, that's interesting that you're saying that it's not available. I can shoot off a mail to the team who's in charge of the centralized deployment and ask them about that. So that's all I have. If you guys have any questions around other features or have anything else you'd like to see, feel free to drop it in the IM if it's not already on user voice.
Awesome. Thanks, Wei.
Kim, we're having a little trouble with projecting the slides here. I'm not sure what's going on. Are you still seeing the coming soon slide?
Yes.
I am, yes. I'm going to request control, Doug, and we'll see if I can potentially
Yeah.
share from
And
there.
while we're doing that, I think we missed a question about close events. So do you want to expand on that?
So there was a question about document events related to open and close, I think.
Yep. And will they be supported?
Yeah, so today we support that at a very limited level. So upon document open, you can say, open my task pane is pretty much the level of support we provide. And you can also run a function as part of it. But if you have any other requirement, let us know. The close is something that we don't provide. And I think design-wise, it's a much more complicated one to support, given the document could be closed through many different ways, and then we don't have a runtime to propagate those events across.
Great, thanks, Sudhi. All right, so next, before we wrap up today, I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about ways that you can learn more about the Office add-ins platform and the JavaScript APIs, as well as ways that you can engage with us, the product team, as questions come up when you're working with the APIs, or if you encounter issues that you need to report to us. So in terms of developer resources, there's a couple of big learning resources I want to call out here. The first one is ScriptLab. So that's what Sudhi showed earlier, or used earlier to show the examples of the new coming soon Excel API requirement set 1.7 functionality. If you don't already have ScriptLab, I highly encourage you to go get it. You can do so via the link aka.ms/getscriptlab. And as Sudhi mentioned briefly, it is just an add-in. So you basically go get the ScriptLab add-in, download it, and then once you do so within the Office application that you're working in, for example, Excel, you'll see a new top-level menu item, ScriptLab, under which has its own ribbon with buttons that you can use to launch the code pane and the run pane, etc. So you can start exploring those samples that we have published already, and as well as experimenting with your own code there. What we see customers commonly doing is using ScriptLab kind of as a playground to get things working in terms of the API calls. And then once you get things working well in ScriptLab, you know the API calls are solid, then you can then take that code and start, putting it in your own application to actually build your full-fledged add-in. The other documentation resource we have is the docs themselves. So I have the link here in this slide. Within the docs, a couple things, especially for you folks that are just getting started with the Office add-ins platform. Near the top of the table of contents on the left-hand side of the doc set, you'll see an overview section, just some high-level overview information, but then you'll see a section of quick starts. So we've published quick starts, which are basically 5 minutes, build your first add-in in 5 minutes for a variety of hosts, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, etc. And within each one, you can choose which editor you want to use. So for example, if you're using Visual Studio, there's instructions within each quick start for how to use Visual Studio to create your first add-in for that host. If you're not using Visual Studio, you're using some other tools, maybe VS Code or some other type of IDE, there's also instructions for how to do that using something we call the Yeoman generator for Office. So check out the quick starts if you're new. That's a great way to dive in and kind of get the feel for how to create an add-in from scratch and kind of what the building blocks are, what the pieces of the puzzle are. Once you've done the quick starts, the next section there is the tutorials. And tutorials, think of tutorials as the next step after your quick starts. They're more in-depth and a little more extensive than the quick starts. The quick starts, you just build your first add-in very quickly. The tutorials actually walk you through a variety of API functionality that's available for the host you're working with. So today we have an Excel tutorial, a Word tutorial, and a PowerPoint tutorial with others coming soon. So check out the tutorials as well if you haven't already done so. In terms of engaging with us, the product team, we get customer feedback across a variety of channels, and I wanted to make sure that everyone on the call here is aware of how to communicate with us, depending on the type of feedback you have. So if you encounter, come up with a question about the API and is simply, I'm doing this, it's not working as I expect, what am I missing, or how, what should I do to accomplish the functionality that I need? I encourage you to post those questions to Stack Overflow, and be sure to tag your questions with Office-JS. And if it happens to be an Outlook-specific question, also add the additional tag Outlook Web Add-ins, Outlook-Web-Add-ins. The product team, although Stack Overflow is a community forum, it obviously isn't a Microsoft-specific support forum. The product team does monitor those tags on Stack Overflow, so chances are, if you have an API question, you post it to Stack Overflow with those tags. That's a great way to get your questions in front of members of the product team. If you encounter issues with the Office add-ins platform or the APIs, for example, maybe something's working on Excel desktop but doesn't work in Excel Online, that would be a good example of an issue that we'd want you to report to us via the Office Dev/Office.js repo and GitHub. So the repo, obviously Office.js itself isn't open source, but the repo exists, amongst other things, as a way for us to collect and interact with our customers on issues reported for the Office.js APIs and platforms. So if you have issues, please post them there, and a member of the product team will begin to engage with you there to resolve that issue. And lastly, feature requests. So Wei mentioned user voice. Highly encourage you, if there's API functionality that's lacking today that you really need, please post the suggestion to user voice. And before you do so, take a look. Somebody may have already posted it. The great thing about user voice, for those of you who haven't used it before, is that once a feature request is posted, other users can then upvote that feature request. So it's a great way for our product team to get a sense for the demand, the volume of demand from our customers on certain API functionality. So that's a quick look at developer resources. Check these things out if you haven't already. And we welcome you to engage with us across these channels as you need to in the days ahead. So quick time check here. We've got about 8 minutes left. Dana, are there other questions that have come in via the IM that we want to address?
There was one question about when the 1.7 APIs will be GA for Mac, and Tong had answered that it should be available for all platforms within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And they're that you're in the process of moving the library intelligence, etc., over too. So people are eagerly awaiting the new.
Perfect.
Another question is, how can we uninstall a side-loaded Word add-in? At the My Add-ins ribbon, there's only an Add button, but no Remove button.
Can you go into the insert dialog and right click?
I believe we have an article on that. Kim, do you recall? I think we have a reference topic or something that describes how to clean up the add-ins that you've installed locally.
We do. Let me switch over to my browser here, and I will. You see my browser now, Doug?
Yes, we're with you.
Perfect.
Yep.
So within the how-to guides here of the documentation, there's a test and debug section. And I believe the information that Doug's referring to is here within the test and debug section. Let's see. Not sure if that's clear the Office cache. And so the easiest way, if you have side-loaded add-ins and you just kind of want a clean slate within your host application, you want to get rid of those buttons on the Office on the ribbon. The easiest way to do so is just by clearing the Office cache. And so this article that I'm showing here, again, it's within the Office add-ins docs under how-to guides in the test and debug section. And it's called, the section is Clear the Office Cache. If you delete the contents of these folders on the various platforms, that will essentially remove any of the add-ins that you've previously sideloaded within your local environment.
Okay, Kim, do you want to copy that link into the IM window?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, another question from Bill. Can we get a version of ScriptLab for Outlook in the store?
So we have an engineer who has been working on it, but I don't know when he'll finish up. It's kind of a side project that he's working on. So hopefully we'll see it coming through in the next couple of months. If so, I'll definitely mention it in our next community call.
Yep, and so as soon as it's available, we'll let everyone know for sure. And I think this was brought up before by Edwin, recalc event in Excel. Can you do it?
Yes, so the calculation events are being worked on right now. I think there was one other slide in the presentation that talked about upcoming events. So calculation is part of that list.
What about an event handler for ranges, similar to what they can do with tables? That's another question.
Yeah, so well, we already had range-related events. So that means any range changes or selection changes, you could get notified. We've simplified that, which means you don't need binding anymore. And then you can just, on a given range, you can subscribe to data and selection changed. And then also, I believe the event is on worksheet. So you could say worksheet.onDataChanged, worksheet.onSelectionChanged events. And as part of the parameters, we give you the address and also the change type, which means you could say, what was the actual change that triggered things like range edited or row inserted, deleted. Same thing with columns, cell inserted, cell deleted. So there's a lot more finer level information, including the source, like was it local or remote. And this is available on worksheet, and you can also subscribe to that at the worksheet collection level. So any worksheet across your workbook, you can get notified of a worksheet data change or selection change events. So with the new set of events that we have, there's really no need to go back to the bindings, because bindings was a way to create a reference, and then on that reference you had to subscribe. With the new events, you can directly operate at the object level, things like a worksheet or table.
Okay, great. And then another question, do you have any intention in the future to have JS add-ins in all the functionality that VSTO provides?
So we certainly want to provide all the important functionalities over, and we are on a path towards kind of covering the feature set, feature gaps. There are a set of features that currently doesn't lend itself well for the JavaScript add-ins, namely the application level access, application level events, because the scope of the document is limited to scope of the add-in is limited to the document that you're currently on. So which means things like referencing another workbook or opening another workbook, getting application level events, those are all going to be out of scope. And then also, we're looking at, hey, of all the 4,000 plus APIs that VBA has and VST also provides, which ones are really relevant in the more modern web technology world. And we're going through each one of those and figuring out, based on the usage, based on the scenario prioritization, which ones do we need to enable. A big part of that exercise is also to look at the feedback from the community. We look at user voice very closely with each of the quarterly planning and see, for a given scenario, let's say we pick up copy paste. Okay, what are the scenarios that users actually care about? Is it just the data and formatting? Do they also care about particular, detail level API configuration that we need to enable? So feel free to open new issues on user voice. Tell us what you're missing, and if you see like a big item that's missing, let us know, and it should help us focus and prioritize.
Okay, great. A couple more questions, and then I think we'll wrap up since we have about 1 minute left. But can you add support for ref edit control in the task pane dialog? Does that make sense?
We'll have to get back on that question. I don't know the answer.
Okay. Okay, Edwin, we'll get back to you on that and everyone else on the call. So hopefully we can get that answer, and we'll add some of the questions and answers that we haven't gotten to in the blog post. And then last question, async dialog does not support Office context document object. Any idea how to document settings on the dialog window?
Okay, let me read the question again just to see if we understand.
Okay.
Okay.
So if I understood this question correctly, so through the dialogue, we don't have a two-way messaging. I believe we can message from the dialogue back to the parent, but parent to the dialogue messaging channel is missing. We are working on an API that we don't have a release number yet, which is to allow, sending a property bag to send information across the parent and the dialogue API. But that is not available as of now, except for OneNote.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Sudhi. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Just a reminder, the recording will be made available really soon on the Office Developer YouTube channel. And as previously discussed, our next call will be July 11th. So please download the meeting invite if you haven't already done so, using the link at the bottom of this slide. And feel free to submit your questions ahead of time. For those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, for this call, thank you very much. And we do have some questions that we didn't get to today. We'll address those in the blog post that we write to recap this call. And we'll be tweeting about that blog post when it's available, as well as a video on the Office Dev Twitter account. So if you haven't already done so, please follow that account, Office Dev. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on